Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Horror Analysis with me, Drew. Hi there. Today we're continuing with History of Horror, and today we're going to go over the entire 1700s, the entire 18th century, all in one swoop. In the 1900s, the 20th century, I did it decade by decade, with the exception of the very early part, which was every 15 years. The first 30 of the first 30 years of the 20th century I did as 2 videos instead of 3. The 19th century, the 1800s, I did every 25 years, 4 videos. And then the 1700s, I'm doing it all in one video, just to get the same sort of length, same sort of, oh, nose itch, sorry. Here I am scratching my nose on video. Nice. Right. The 1700s, first of all, has a 50-year gap of what? Nothing's going on. Alright, I gotta scratch my nose. I'm just gonna put this up for a second. Oh, goodness. I need some hot water, too, while I'm at it. Oh. Okay. Better. There's a 50-year gap. There's a tiny bit at the beginning of the 1700s, and then there's from the 1775 on, there's quite a bit. Or maybe even, 1765 is going to be the first big book. And a little bit before that, but then it starts 1765 and then goes on into the 1800s and 1900s, as we said. That's when the snowball starts building. But there's quite a bit of a gap. Well, there's gaps that I mentioned before, like when there's a war going on. I couldn't really notice anything going on during this time. Obviously, 1700s, the American Civil War is going to be going on, and the French Revolution. So that's probably why most of these people are British. There's any Americans in here? No, not really. Well, one German for Goethe at the very end. Well, let's actually put the list up. This is the list, the 1750 to 1799, cutting it in half. Johann Goethe in the middle there. I talked about him last time, Faust, and I did mention the Erlkönig. Der Erlkönig, the Earl King, the Alder King, if you in English. Oh, pardon me. Oh, that's good stuff. And the rest of these are pretty much British, I believe. I don't think any of these are American. Which means the first Americans would be Hawthorne and Washington Irving. Then followed quickly by Poe. Right. Nice. Just keeping it in my head. Let's see. Let's start going backwards. Ending with Charles Brockden Brown. For these, I took out. These are all called Edgar Huntley, aka or also known as the Sleepwalker, or the Sleepwalker. It's one of those. Edgar Huntley, semicolon, or, comma, the Sleepwalker. And then it's Ormond, or the Mystery, I think. And Wyland, or the Transformation. It just took up 3 lines, and I didn't want to do that. So, Edgar Huntley is 1799, so is Ormond, and Wyland is 1798, if you believe Wikipedia. If you believe Lovecraft, it's reversed. It's 1789. So I don't. I'm erring on the side of Wikipedia. I don't know why I'm erring on the side of Wikipedia. It's a coin toss. So Edgar Huntley and the other two didn't have names or dates rather in Lovecraft's book. Edgar Huntley, Lovecraft says it begins with a sleepwalker digging a grave, which is a good image. Ormond involves members of a sinister secret brotherhood. And Wieland, a Pennsylvania Dutch engulfed by a wave of religious fanaticism, hears voices and slays his family because of the voices of either God or the devil or whatever. And then at the end it says that the bad guy in this was a malign ventriloquist. So if you're a ventriloquist, don't go up to religious nuts and make voices saying that you're God to kill your family. That's a dickish thing to do. And I was like, I read that and I was like, what? There's a book that had a malign ventriloquist that told people to kill people? That's awful. It's a bad. It's not just a bad thing for a person to do. It's just a silly idea. Charles Brockden Brown was, according to Lovecraft, right in the school of Anne Radcliffe, which is 2 down from here. Before we get to that, Samuel Taylor Coleridge, I talked about Christabel last time. The Rime of the Ancient Mariner was 1797, and that was... it's a poem, of course. Most people do know it. It is a very good poem. Horror, it has horror elements. There's the ghost ship, with the ribs of the ship, and is crewed by the dead. And then the ship that the Ancient Mariner is on, everybody died on it, but everybody gets back up and sails the boat to England so he can get off, so he can make it home safely because he repents. Spoiler alert. But there's life raising the dead sort of things going on in Coleridge. Matthew Lewis, the monk, is 1796 before we get into Anne Radcliffe. This is a big one. This is actually the other book in Schill's chapter on the apex of Gothic fiction. The monk is actually being turned into a movie like now. I saw the preview not too long ago. I don't remember if I remember the premise, or I don't think I remember the premise or not. A monk is... There's stuff going on around the monk. A lot of it's supernatural-ish. A lot of it's not just angelic. A lot of it's demonic. Because the monk is not necessarily a good monk. As a lot of these books will have not good monks. Yeah, so let's see. And then we get into Anne Radcliffe. Page 24. Oh, goodness, I should give page numbers. Let me give page numbers. Okay. Oh, I have page numbers on here. Good. The monk. Monk is page 30. This is the apex of the Gothic novel. Coleridge was page 23. He's only mentioned Christabel in here, but it's in there. I'm going to put this up so you don't look at me reading. Oh, before I forget, I'll mention William Blake. Because Lovecraft mentions William Blake also on page 23. He gets sort of listy on page 23. He mentions Blake, Robert Burns, Coleridge, James Hogg, Keats, Goethe, and Walpole, all in one breath. Well, Walpole, of course, gets more screen time, or book time, I guess. Yeah, Walpole gets a bit more talking to. Talking about, yes, what is this? Castle of Otranto. Yeah. So some of these are on page 23. The monk is discussed in the Apex on page 30. Charles Brockton Brown is on page 29, and Anne Radcliffe is on page 28. Is that pretty much everybody? A little bit others. And the other ones are on page 26 and 27. That's Sophia Lee, Miss Barbeau, and Clara Reeve are discussed on 26 and 27. McPherson's Ossian is on page 23. Yeah. So basically from pages 23, meaning the early Gothic novel section, to the beginning of the apex of the Roman Gothic romance, which is page 31, ending on page 31. So 23 to 31, 8 pages. Cool. Right. So the monk. How is the monk described? Is the monk described? The story is one of a Spanish monk, Ambrosio, who from a state of overproud virtue is tempted to the very nadir of evil by a fiend in the guise of the maiden Matilda, and who is finally, when awaiting death at the Inquisition's hand, induced to purchase escape at the price of his soul from the devil, because he deems both body and soul already lost. Forthwith the mocking fiend snatches him to a lonely place, tells him he has sold his soul in vain, since both pardon and chance for salvation were approaching at the moment of his hideous bargain, and completes the sardonic portrayal by rebuking him for his unnatural crimes and casting his body down to a precipice, while his soul is borne off forever to perdition. Nice. And that's going to be turned into a movie recently, or pretty soon. I'm sure you can go on YouTube or IMDb and check out the preview. I did about a month ago. It looked alright. For, it's not necessarily a horror movie. It's going to be a literature type horror movie. But it looked fair. Hopefully fair. Right. Mysteries of 28. Anne Radcliffe. Anne Radcliffe gets a bit of talking about. She wrote 6 novels. I talked about one, Gaston de Blondeville, last time, because it was published in 1826 and written in 1802. The other ones are 1789, The Castles of Athlone and Dunbane. 1790, A Sicilian Romance. 1792, A Romance of the Forest. And 1794, The Mysteries of Udolpho. Of these, Udolpho is by far the most famous and may be taken as an early type of Gothic tale at its best. It is the chronicle of Emily, a young Frenchwoman. I'm actually going to do this. Transplanted into an ancient and portentous castle in the Apennines, through the death of her parents and the marriage of her aunt to the lord of the castle, a scheming nobleman Montoni. The mysterious sounds, opening doors, frightful legends, and nameless horror in a niche behind the black veil all operate in quick succession to unnerve the heroine and her faithful attendant, Annette. But finally, after the death of her aunt, she escapes with the aid of a fellow prisoner whom she has discovered. On the way home, she stops at a chateau filled with fresh horrors, the abandoned wing where the departed chatelaine dwelt, and the bed of death with the black pall. But it is finally restored to security and happiness with her lover Valancourt. After clearing up the secret which seemed for a time to involve her birth in mystery. Clearly this is only a familiar material reworked, but it is so well reworked that Udolpho will always be a classic. Alright. Miss Radcliffe's characters are puppets, but they are less markedly so than those of her forerunners. Alright. Yeah, this is it sort of sounded like some of the other ones we're going to be going over. So it's going back to, Castle of Otranto. This Horace Walpole at the bottom, this is going to be one of the big ones. And further on, Tobias Smollett's going to be influential on him. But yeah, so we'll go on. Robbie Burns, Rabby Burns, as people seem to call him, even though he was never called that to his face, according to QI. Rabby Burns wrote Tam O'Shanter, which is now what the Scots Cap is called. Rabby Burns is the most famous Scottish poet. So Tam O'Shanter, now the Cap, because the character Tam O'Shanter wore one. So he was drinking in a bar. The story of Tam O'Shanter. He was drinking in a bar. He went on his horse to go home. Goes by an old abandoned churchyard where the devil is and a bunch of witches are and the dead and all this crazy stuff. So he's sort of drunk and he goes up and watches them, hiding behind a gravestone or something. And he sees a pretty witch with a short skirt on, and he says, way to dance, short skirt. Whatever that is in Scots. Of course, everybody hears him because he shouted it, and they all chase him. He jumps back on his horse, goes towards the river. They can't cross running water, but the witch finally grabs the tail of the horse, and even though the guy gets away, the horse doesn't have a tail anymore. Cutty Sark. Actually, it's Cutty Sark. That's not the name of the witch, but that's the name of what he calls her, short skirt. Cutty Sark became a boat, and the boat got named, whiskey was named after that, so Cutty Sark sounds familiar because you know the whiskey. I don't like Scotch myself, but I like whiskey. So Cutty Sark. Now it's Tam O'Shanter. So ghosts and devils and witches and stuff from Rabby Burns during this time. The Earl Koenig. Goethe's The Earl Koenig, about a man driving his cart home with his little boy. The little boy says he hears the Earl Koenig calling to him, the Earl King, the Alder King, the Elf King, sometimes translated. Malevolent elf. And so the dad says, no, you don't hear him calling, it's just the wind in the bushes or whatever. Long story short, should I even ruin it for you? I'm not going to. I'm not gonna spoiler it. That's actually one of my favorite horror poems. A lot of horror poems tonight. Rime of the Ancient Mariner, Tam O'Shanter, the Earl Koenig. Macpherson's Ossian at the bottom is also a poemish, epic poem. So, yes. Sophia Lee, The Recess. Do I remember anything about this? This is page 26, I think. Sophia Lee. Twin daughters of Mary, Queen of Scots. It's not supernatural, but it is ambient, a dark ambience. It's sort of the thing. It's going from Horace Walpole, which we'll talk about in a minute, to these three: Sophia Lee, The Recess, Clara Reeve, Otranto, and Miss Barbauld's Sir Bertrand, into Anne Radcliffe and Brockton Brown, into The Monk, and then we go now we're really starting to get supernatural, and that's the birth of the modern horror stuff. So the 1790s to 1800 crossover is where the birth happens, where the supernatural starts being the real start of horror in his view. Of course, Lovecraft is after cosmic fear. It'd also be in Noel Carroll's view, because Noel Carroll requires a monster. So we're going to start getting into monstery stuff. Not just ghost stuff, but monstery stuff. So, yes. Clara Reeve, Otranto, the Old English Baron, is basically a sequel or a prequel to Otranto. Which one was it? This is page 26. The Recess was page 27. Let's see. It doesn't really give any. It's lots of lots of mistaken identities, ending in death, and then the guy doesn't. The guy is the real heir to the throne, or the real heir to the estate, is given the estate because he's the only one left alive. Sort of. It's that sort of thing again and again. That's Anne Radcliffe. That's Horace Walpole. Sir Bertrand by Miss Barbauld. I don't have a first name on her. I couldn't find this anywhere. I did find it finally online. If you do a search for Barbauld, Sir Bertrand, you can find the actual text online, but I couldn't find a synopsis or anything. But it's not that long. I did read it, and then I promptly forgot all about it because it wasn't all that noteworthy. An unfinished fragment called Sir Bertrand. A tale of genuine terror touched only with a clumsy hand. Yeah, I guess that fits. It's got like a genie, and there's sort of death and stuff involved. This knight is after trying to save a girl, and there's stuff going on. Yeah, it's kind of creepy. It's not wonderful, but it's not bad. I'd recommend it. Do a search on it. I think you'll enjoy it. It took me about 20 minutes to read. Maybe half an hour. I don't think it was half an hour. I think it was less than half an hour. Yeah. Oh, and then we go back to Horace Walpole. Horace Walpole wrote the classic one, The Castle of Otranto, in 1764. She talks about that, of course, in page 24 and 25. Alright, so it's about a guy who has a sickly son who's getting married. And he heard a prophecy about, at some point there, the real ruler of his estate, the true heir will come back and kick him out. So he's watching his daughter get married. Sorry, he's watching his son get married to this girl. The son gets hit on the head and dies by something falling off a roof or something. So he says, I'm going to marry the woman myself because my wife hasn't given me any real heirs. So he tries to marry her. She runs away. The guy who's helping her escape is the real guy, but you don't know that till the real heir, but you don't know that till later. The real heir ends up killing the girl's dad, or hurting the girl's dad. The girl's dad falls in love with the other guy's daughter, and then the other guy kills his daughter. It's weird. It's mistaken identity and death. Lots of it. Right. This is a theme that's going to be during the 1700s. And then you go down to Ossian, which is a poem, as I said before. It's a Scots poem. Actually, a lot of Scots in this one, too. What do we have? We have James McPherson and Robbie Burns. Any other Scots? Coleridge wasn't a Scot. Walpole wasn't a Scot. Tobias Smollett was a Scot. Yeah, so Ossian is like supposedly like the Scots Homer, and this guy's telling tales about Finn McCool. I remember that name because it's a cool name. Sort of like Homer telling tales about Odysseus or Agamemnon or whatnot. Achilles, I guess. Paris. Let's say Odysseus because he hasn't. It's less confusing. So Finn McCool is to Ossian as Odysseus is the Homer. So Ossian is about this guy who's going and getting involved with some supernatural things going on at the time. It seemed, I read over it in Wikipedia, it seemed confusing to me. So I'm just skipping it, actually. Tobias Smollett, this one actually goes back to the very early, the dawn of the horror tale Tobias Smollett is going to be in. He talks about the adventures of Ferdinand Count Fathom, which is sort of a precursor to these ones before, because it introduces a really, really bad dude. He's just an evil guy, sort of like the bad guy in Castle of Otranto, or the ventriloquist who tells the guy to kill his family or whatever. It's just a bad guy. So that sort of evil character is really introduced in this Tobias Smollett book, 1753. Now, that was the last half of the 1700s. You want to know what's in the first half of the 1700s? Nothing. Here it is. This is one thing that Tobias Smollett 2021 in Shill. First half of the 1700s, one thing, 1705, that is also mentioned on page 21. And then one thing that I found on my own, because I don't have anything for this? So, oh good, I misspelled it too. Oh yes, great. So it's Daniel Defoe's apparition, with an N at the end, of Mrs. Veal, in 1705. That is mentioned on page 21. It's a ghost story. A woman dies. Her friend unexpectedly gets a visit from her, but she's all weird, and then finds out that she died like 6 days ago. Just the ghost got there before the news of her death. Because in 1705, you would think that it would be a ghost would be able to travel faster than news of the death of her friend. And then I had to look up something else. Give me something else. Something else has to be going on in the 1700s. And yeah, the first translation of 1001 Arabian Nights, Arabian Tales. Genie and Aladdin and all this stuff. There's a lot of supernaturally stuff. Some of it's light, some of it's quite dark. So the first translation was 1706. So, yeah, that's it for the first half of the century. So from 1706, which this is not one that even Lovecraft mentions, to 1753, there is nothing. And 1753 and 1760, there's not a whole lot going on either. The ball starts rolling with Horace Walpole, Castle of Otranto. I mean, it was influenced by Tobias Smollett, but, pardon me, there's nothing going on during that time. I was going over my history. Well, I mean, historically there wasn't drama. I mean, Napoleonic Wars wouldn't start yet. There was, what's it called? Pretender, in England. Bonnie Prince Charlie? Yeah. Sorry, my English history is not great. That would be during this time too, but that wouldn't really stop horror writing in England. It might influence it in Scotland, because Bonnie Prince Charlie was in sort of Scottish area. So Tobias Smollett and James McPherson and Robbie Burns later on. Something about the war might have, the little civil strife, conflict might have influenced them. Might have. I don't know. There's not a lot in history going on that should account for not having horror during this time. I couldn't figure out anything. Oh, maybe diseases or something. I don't think so. What's going on? George the First? George the Second? I don't know. It's sort of a happy-go-lucky time, maybe? Maybe they're just... I don't know. Anyway, so nothing in the first half of this century. That's going to annoy me. It's apparition, really. It's apparition of Mrs. Veal. Daniel Defoe. Right. So, that's pretty much it. I can't figure out why there's nothing in that section. And then, of course, we're going to go into Chapter 2 of this, The Dawn of the Horror Tale, which is everything pre-1600. I'm going to add some stuff onto there, because, stuff that creeps me out from that time. Like Shakespeare. He doesn't talk about Shakespeare. But I think that's a pretty big name to be mentioned. And with Macbeth being dark and spectral, Hamlet has a ghost in it too, and there's others with ghosts in it. But and there's magician and magic and stuff. But gods and stuff playing around. But Macbeth is kind of creepy. It does have creepiness to it. So, everything before 1700 is going to be the next video. Yeah, this is a 35-minute video, and I'm pretty much out of stuff to talk about. So, it took a century, and did it in less than the time that I did 25 years last time. I will go over stuff that's, if you're going forward, which you can be, Tobias Smollett's Count Fathom is going to be the first real bad guy that's going to influence Walpole. And Walpole is going to be the real big first Gothic novel. Castle of Otranto is going to be, everybody seems to think, is the first one. This is, if you ever get a book that has like, hey, the first Gothic novels, it's going to have Castle of Otranto in there. Or first horror tales, or early horror tales, or something along those lines. With the exception of Goethe and the poems, it's cool that there are poems during this time. I'm going to have to add some of these to when I talk about horror poetry. Radcliffe is extremely influenced by Walpole, and that would be the next big name. The other ones, Sarah Reeve, Miss Barbauld, and Sophia Lee, are sort of rehashing Walpole's stuff. The Monk by Lewis takes it to the next step. Charles Brockden Brown is sort of copying Radcliffe again. That's the one with the ventriloquist. The ventriloquist that pretends to be God to get people to get killed, to kill his family. It's crazy. It's an awful. Don't ever turn that into a movie. This is so bad. It's a horror spoof, it sounds like to me, but it's funny anyway. So, and then early on we have a ghost story by Defoe. Most people know Daniel Defoe. Maybe Last of the Mohicans. What was other Defoe stuff? Oh, goodness gracious. Defoe. Robinson Crusoe. Moll Flanders. Wikipedia. There we go. Oh, good. You're looking at me. Look it up. Alright. What we have? We have Robinson Crusoe. Further Adventures of Robinson Crusoe, Moll Flanders, oh, it's not Last Mohicans. Who am I thinking of? I'm thinking of somebody else for Last Mohicans. I don't know. Moll Flanders was, Roxanne? Yeah. Anyway. So Daniel Defoe is a big name. And it's cool that he wrote a neat little ghost story. I did read it, or listen to it, and it was pretty good. For 1706, it was very good. It was very, apparition, it's got an N in it. It was very mature for 1706, 1705. But ghost stories sort of get timeless after a while. So, he tapped it. He tapped into the vein of, horror for a nice little ghost story. So, cheers to him. So that's pretty much it for me today. We're going to finish up History of Horror next time. My name is Drew. Thanks for tuning in. Have a great night.